Huh? No, no, please. You must let me get this communication out. They have to be warned while there is still time. I can't let... You don't know what I've seen. You can't possibly understand or comprehend. The devil is real.
Now,
I know.
say the magic word.
Built his cage.
I'm getting abnormal readings here.
God!
Get all these levels.
I'm the Shadow Man!
Doom 3 is a spooky, scary first-person shooter and pissing-in-the-dark simulator. It was developed by id Software and released in 2004 for the PC, and a year later in 2005 for the original Xbox. It was intended to be a reboot of the series that would stay close to the admittedly sparse lore of the original 1993 Doom, which is not to be confused with the 2016 game of the same name, because the people who name games are cruel psychopaths who never have to look anything up on the internet. It was also intended to show off some of the new lighting technology the company had been working on, and as such would lean into more of a horror aesthetic. It received a great critical reception and became id's highest-selling game at the time, but I still feel like it's kind of looked back on as the black metal sheep of the Doom franchise. You know about Doom, I'm sure. I don't need to introduce the series to you. It is, after all, one of the most well-known video games of all time. It played into the dredges of the Satanic Panic and sat next to Mortal Kombat on the table while Jack Thompson pretended that video games made kids more violent than listening to their parents fight. The rest of the Doom series falls into the category of what the kids call boomer shooters before they shakily glide away on their heelys. I may not actually know what kids are doing anymore. Anyway, they're all some variation of fast-paced run-and-gun action against the demonic hordes of hell, and then plodding around in the dark, all by itself, is Doom 3. Luckily for me, I never really cared either way for the original Doom, despite probably sitting on a phone book to see it on the family's Windows 97. Fighting demons was cool, but I get tired of not knowing where I'm supposed to go. Doom 2016 was fine, but my favorite game in the series has always been Doom 3, which I played as a teenager on the original Xbox. I have vivid memories of gritting my teeth as I crept down a hallway smeared in blood, rocket launcher in hand, just waiting for a possessed soldier to rip and tear me apart. Imagine that, holding a rocket launcher in a first-person shooter and still being afraid. It was a survival horror experience that didn't take away your ability to fight back like Amnesia or Outlast. You had enough firepower to level a third-world country, and you were still running for your life. I remember the morbid glee of discovering that after shooting the NPCs in the intro, I could beat their corpses with my flashlight, causing them to explode in a fountain of gore that left nothing behind but a blood-soaked skeleton.
I'm the Shadow Man. I sneak and I creep.
It was amazing, but there's an elephant in the room that you might not know about and that I think is worth noting before we really get into it. If you're playing Doom 3 on modern consoles, you're playing a remastered version of the game that was released in 2012 called the BFG Edition, though some storefronts still just call it Doom 3. It gives you a lot more health and ammo and you move faster, there are fewer enemies and those enemies do less damage, and there are checkpoints in the levels so you don't have to start them over completely if you die without a manual save. Overall, it makes for a much easier game, but if that's all that changed, I probably wouldn't even mention it, or at least not give it its own entire section like this. The bigger problem for me is that apparently this remaster couldn't implement the same dynamic lighting systems as the original game. I've got some comparison clips here, and depending on the YouTube compression, you might be able to get an idea of what I mean.
Sergeant Kelly. We're under attack by an unknown enemy force. Fall back to Marine HQ to regroup. group.
Doom 3 was always a very dark game, both in tone and in luminance. In the base game, your only reliable source of light was a flashlight that had to be equipped in place of a weapon. It forced you to choose to either see or shoot, but that was offset by that dynamic lighting system. Objects in the environment, like computer screens and fireballs, put out their own light, so you had these incredibly tense battles against demons in the dark with only the light of your own muscle flashes and the glow of their eyes to help you aim. But the BFG edition can't really do that anymore. Those muzzle flashes and fireball effects are gone or massively reduced. Because this lighting system is a lot less dynamic, you would literally just be fighting in the dark, so instead, the game is much brighter to compensate, and you have a rechargeable shoulder-mounted flashlight that you can use while you're holding a gun. I would appreciate that change if the beam of that flashlight diffused a little, but it's very small, so you wind up only able to actively use about a third of your screen at a time. On top of that, it's off-center from the aiming reticle, which is fucking infuriating. I do not understand why they would do that. The base game flashlight was also off-center, but again, you weren't using it while aiming your gun. If you're only going to let me see a very small part of what's happening, could it at least be the part that I'm using to fight? Okay, you get it. The BFG edition isn't perfect. It is inferior to the original experience, but it's also the only version you can play on modern consoles, and it still functions as a game. I just wanted you to know all of that in case you tried the BFG edition and thought that the setting was interesting, but the game itself is kind of bland. If that's the case, then the original Doom 3 might be a lot more enjoyable for you. I went into this review vaguely aware that there were some differences in the versions, but it wasn't until I was a ways into the BFG edition that it became apparent to me how much those little changes add up. But since that's the version I think most people will have access to, and the version I originally played for this video, it will be the one that I'm mainly talking about. So, getting into it, the star of the show is definitely the atmosphere. Even without that dynamic lighting system, if you can look past a poly count that is admittedly a bit chunky by today's standards, the Mars base is incredibly immersive. I'm talking about the environmental design, the vibe. Every gloomy inch of the Mars base has been stuffed with esoteric machinery and the support systems that operate and maintain them. Computer screens glow, server racks hum, and if you really want a vision of the future, just look at this. They've even got working mirrors.
Welcome to the world of tomorrow!
It's a grungy, industrial, futuristic corporate hellscape, an OSHA inspector's worst nightmare even before the demons got there. In many ways, the Mars base reminds me of Rapture. In the bowels of a city built far from the restraints of legal oversight and safety regulations, an army of faceless drones slave away in the dark. Its architecture is cold and merciless, built exclusively in the pursuit of progress, an oil-stained, blood-soaked altar to the dark god of science. I love it. All across the game, dozens of little moving, glowing noisemakers toil away with the sole purpose of selling you on the feeling of crawling through a giant dystopian death laboratory. I don't know if there was a competition for what game could have the most doodads, thingamajigs, and whirly-bobs, but I think Doom 3 won. Some part of the id team was clearly deeply committed to the believability of these areas as workspaces for research and development, and I think that's worth commending, but as cool as that all is, and I do think it's cool, something is still missing. The Mars base really could stand to have a few creature comforts. Like I said, I love the atmosphere, but it's to the point that it's hard to imagine humans actually live here, and that may be to the game's detriment. Living on Mars isn't intended to be a punishment. There are civilians that have to eat and sleep and whatever else humans do here. We see restrooms, break rooms, and infirmaries, but we don't see where people live. I'm reminded of those sections in Dead Space 2 going through the mall area and the daycare. It's human architecture. But in Doom 3, we read in emails about parties and getting together to play board games. They had lives outside of the functions of their jobs, but we don't ever really see Mars City beyond a few dimly lit metal hallways, and that's a shame. It would have gone a long way towards humanizing the mounds of viscera, and it would have made the horror more effective. As believable and detailed as these areas can be, the actual level layouts are very simple, and they do become incredibly repetitive. We see hallways in offices, laboratories, waste management facilities, communications towers, and mine shafts, but they're still hallways. It rarely feels like you're exploring a logical space. You won't meander around for a while and open a shortcut to somewhere you've been before, or see an interesting monument in the distance and make your way to it. It's pretty much just hallways and rooms with only 2 working exits, which is still kind of a hallway if you think about it. Fight through one dark hallway, clear one dark room, open the door to another hall. God damn it! Stupid door jump scare bullshit. There aren't a lot of optional paths you can take either, and exploration doesn't feel like a core focus the way that it does in the rest of the series. There's not much in the way of secrets, and the ones that are there typically just give you more ammunition and armor, which is a nice reward in the base game, but not really helpful in the BFG edition. It's a strange line to draw because I like the environmental design so much and the actual level design so little. And it doesn't help that while you're hoofing it through those hallways, the game will be constantly spawning enemies in behind you. There are sections where a false panel on a wall drops down after you walk by, and even if you know where that panel is, you can't do anything about it except to go walk through its trigger point. Same with the doors. Even if you were suspicious of one, it's not like Metroid where you could shoot the door to open it from further away. You have to rub your face on it to Before long, the game doesn't even bother with those false panels anymore. Instead, it'll just teleport demons in with lightning and a sound effect. I assume this is because otherwise, since the game is just one long hallway and the enemy AI is fairly brain dead, you could just run backwards and kill everything in the game. You might be surprised then to know that the game actually does have a decently sized bag of tricks, but most of them you'll only see once, and others you will see over and over and over again. Still, I think I can see some of the building blocks of what would go on to be so well done in Fear a year later and Dead Space in 2008. That atmosphere that I've talked so much about, the dynamic lighting and the way that the story is told through a combination of text and audio logs in combination with the communicators. Even the way enemies will occasionally come out of logical places in the environment, like vents or from under shelving, reminds me of the necromorphs. The imps behind doors was annoying, but then you'll come across a one-off interaction that takes advantage of the fact that you let your guard down because of all the repetition, and every time I felt like throwing my hands up and saying, "That! Right there! That was so good! Do more of that!" Like when I interacted with this computer monitor about 2/3 of the way through the game. Yeah, that one got me good. Or these storage lockers. I've opened up at least a dozen of these. There's a locker imp! You've got to be kidding me. I should have known that something was off because this one's code is right next to it and it seems so lazy, but my guard was down. It was novel and different, and it sticks out in my mind so much compared to the hours that I spent shooting down dark hallways. I'm not trying to pretend Doom 3 invented any of these things, but the groundwork for something great was there in 2004. It was on to something with this formula, but it never took the chance to iterate on it. And I'll come back to this idea, but it's so weird to me that after Doom 3, which by all measures at the time was a massive success, they started pumping out mobile games. The only other major release that they had after this until Doom 2016 was Rage, and in case you don't know, that one wasn't exactly a blockbuster. Unlike an imp behind a door, the sound design is effective, but subtle. That is aside from the main menu theme, which rocks. I like it, but at the same time, it might be the second point where the game sets an expectation that it doesn't really even try to meet. The first is having Doom in the name. This title track feels much more in line with classic Doom than what the player will be experiencing for the majority of the game.
access controller currently stationed at Mars City. I'm not sure who to send this to, so I decided to send it to quite a few people.
Aside from that main menu, there's almost no background music at all. Instead, there are short ambient loops that feel appropriate and build suspense.
Warning, reactor core offline. Please follow safety procedure orange.
Things like hissing pipes, dripping water, a rattling vent, and the whoosh of the doors of God fucking damn it, imps. Mixed in with the normal industrial sounds are more human noises, snippets of whispering, crying, laughing, begging for help. It's done well, really creepy and effective. I love the less ambient sounds too, things as simple as the beeps and swooshes that play when you open and navigate the PDA are deeply nostalgic to me. Speaking of the PDA, you'll spend a fair amount of time in here reading emails and listening to memos of varying voiceover quality.
Out here, they could be experimenting on God knows what. There are quite a few people missing, and no Marines, of course. It's the civilian population I'm referring to. Bottom line, whatever it is they have going on here has my men on a razor's edge.
Because shit hit the fan almost as soon as you get on the planet, there's no time to establish much in the way of characters and the world, and that's what a lot of these PDA snippets are for. I do enjoy them, even if most of the time they're kinda just a ham-fisted delivery method for codes to open doors. Still, they give us a window into the slow downfall of the Mars base through the eyes of the people who lived it. For example, you understand that a place like this probably has several redundant power systems. There shouldn't be any one point of failure for anything, but by the time you step off the space boat, large sections of the base are going through regular blackouts because those backup systems have been duct taped together over and over. Supplies are running out, they can't get new parts, people are leaving because they're scared, and someone has been sabotaging systems internally. You'll find records of the investigation, but it hit a dead end of bureaucratic red tape. It builds a creeping sense of desperation over the course of the game that has nothing to do with the fact that everyone has been eaten by monsters, and gives depth to the world that would be missing. A little flavor to the corpses. Actually, that might not be the best way to say that. The Mars base was a special kind of man-made hell long before the demons got there. The corporate kind you get in Alien or Stasis or Mouthwashing. They were adrift, alone on the celestial ocean, barely making things work before it all fell apart. I love it because if you want to engage with Doom 3 as a pure shooter, you can. It's not going to force you to sit through cutscenes while it spoon feeds you the misery, but you'll get so much more from the game by listening to the people and reading between the lines. Sometimes you'll find a little side story that weaves between emails and memos, like the tale of Robert J. Finch. Rob has trivia night next week and needs to brush up on his Shakespearean literature, but he's had trouble focusing on that because he's scheduled to leave Mars soon and get back to Earth. He's excited because his little niece Annie is almost 9, and his brother is thinking about having another baby. Sure would be a shame if he wound up getting his face chewed off in this hallway. Damn, he only had 2 more weeks until retirement. I know not everyone enjoys this style of storytelling, but I was glad to have it in between the firefights. Aside from the PDA entries, there isn't much in the way of a story. I don't even think I need a spoiler alert to tell you that this is the main bad guy. He couldn't be more villain-coded if he were a healthcare CEO in a MAGA hat. There are no big reveals or rug pulls to keep you guessing. And the Doom guy has less personality than Plank, so if you're a player who cares about story like I do, it really is a matter of finding the devil in the details. Instead, you'll spend the vast majority of your time shooting things, so how's that? Well, when I was playing the BFG edition of the game, the combat was disappointing in many ways, but if I had to sum it up, I would say that it's let down by the game's inability to pick a lane. I feel like the BFG edition changes were meant to bring the game closer to that boomer shooter style of the earlier Doom games, but even after the updates, you don't really feel powerful. Your weapons really aren't very fun to use, and despite everything else I said about the audio, the weapon sound design leaves a lot to be desired. They feel and sound so weak. I haven't unloaded many firearms in metal-walled office buildings, but it seems like they should be punchier, you know? It's really highlighted when you're fighting the enemy soldiers who seem to be using the same weapons you are, but their guns have big boom, and yours sounds like the gunfire I would make with my mouth while telling you a story. On top of the sound design for the guns, the lack of response for enemies, how many bullets they soak up, and how slowly you move all work together to make the Doom guy feel immensely less powerful than you might expect if you were coming from a different Doom game. You wind up needing to go through almost an entire magazine of submachine gun ammo to take down 1 or 2 enemies, and having to pump 3 to 5 shotgun shells into a monster you aren't rubbing up against is a real speed bump for my flow state. Of course, in the BFG edition, they also do less damage to the player, so things turn into kind of a slap fight if you aren't constantly walking backwards. I still wouldn't go so far as to say that it's bad. I have played much worse shooters, but it gets old and there's a lot of it. You know that bit about the imp jumping through the door? I wasn't joking. It happens over and over and over again. There just isn't enough variety in the enemy types or the locations to justify the game's length. You'll go through level after level after level of laboratories that all look basically the same, fighting the same enemies. There's almost no verticality to the arenas, and the player can't jump or dodge or climb. There's also no cover system, and most of the time you can barely see. So you could imagine how that would start to wear on you. Even a dip into hell itself and losing my entire arsenal only to retrieve it all again 10 minutes later didn't do much to freshen things up. To be fair, the later bosses become more puzzles than fight, and while I appreciate that the game tries to change things up, it's just too little too late, and outside of these very few encounters, you're playing the same song hour after hour. I do think that Doom 3 has enough variety in its weapons loadout to keep things interesting, but those weapons have a very linear progression in terms of usefulness, so when you find a new weapon, that essentially becomes your best weapon in all scenarios. Optimally, you would want to save your hot load of plasma for the big boys and bring out your shotgun for weaker enemies that run at you, and that does kind of happen in the base game, but you won't need that in the BFG edition because you'll almost never run out of ammo for your strongest guns. In fact, once I got the shotgun, I don't think I ever had to use the pistol again, and the same thing happened when I got the SMG. There were also several times I wound up with something like 80 rockets or 50 grenades because they're all over the place, and I didn't wind up using the explosives much anyway because enemies have a tendency to just run directly at you, and I would wind up killing myself long before they had the chance. Doom 3 is at its best in its early sections, what I would call the survival horror phase. Its tense, frantic gunfights in the dark feel good as you're coming to grips with the enemies and the tools the game gives you to deal with them, but it doesn't take long before you hit a point where you've seen pretty much every card the game has to play, and there will still be a lot of game left after that point. The base game stays in this phase a lot longer, and it's better for it, but its enemies still feel spongy, and they do a lot more damage, which can make the difficulty feel a little cheap at times. The quick saves do help with that frustration, but I wish enemies had something like weak points that you could take advantage of as you become better at the game. Headshots do seem to do more damage, but even the weakest enemies will still take several shots to the head, and the larger enemies can soak up a ton of lead. I realize that it sounds like I'm simultaneously saying that I wish the base game were easier while complaining that the BFG edition is easier and therefore boring, but it's a difference of approach. I would like to be rewarded for shooting better by feeling more powerful, rather than just having more bullets and health packs laying around. Some of these problems are improved by the DLC, the Lost Missions, and Resurrection of Evil, but that doesn't really do anything for the main campaign. They are separate, short stories with a few extra weapons and enemy types, but ultimately I didn't care for the grabber gun, and the combat still felt like more of the same. If anything, they try to move things further away from the survival horror side of things, and it's a shame because that's the part of the game that I was actually enjoying. Before I hit the conclusion, I want to take a minute to talk about Phobos. Phobos is the name of one of Mars's moons, but it's also the name of a Doom 3 mod, and it is awesome. I'm not commonly a player who tries a lot of mods, especially not story expansion mods, but Phobos is so cool to me, even as a free mod, that if you could only play either the base game or the mod, I would probably recommend the mod. It fixes almost everything I've said I didn't like about Doom 3 and the BFG edition, and if you have the game on GOG, they have a one-click installer that does all the setup for you. It has a much stronger focus on actually telling a story, the level layouts are more interesting, there are new enemy types, and the weapons feel so much better to use. Just look at the base game pistol. And the Phobos pistol. It cranks up the action and the tension and builds a compelling mystery that makes me want to keep going, even though at this point I've worn pretty thin on the Doom 3 combat. The mod does start out a little slow. At first I thought it was going to be some kind of walking simulator, but you'll be back to fighting through the hordes of hell in no time. I really appreciated playing as a character who actually reacts to what's going on, even if the voice acting is about the best you could expect from a free mod.
Your arrival, the pilot, Frank, is an old friend of mine.
Frank who? Wait, hostiles? Whoa, you're going a mile a minute.
The hostiles! They're unlike anything I've ever seen. I must admit, I'm in shock of this whole situation.
As far as I'm concerned, Phobos is exactly what Doom 3 needed more of. It's got those lived-in spaces that I said I wish the game had. The creature comforts like a gym, a basketball court, recreational and living spaces. Even its office blocks feel less sterile. Enemies react more dynamically, and the imps don't constantly do the door thing, though they still got me a few times. If you don't already have the game, it goes on sale with both versions, and the DLC and this mod on GOG for like $4. I highly recommend it. The price is the same for Steam, but setting up the mod can be kinda weird if you haven't done that before. Speaking of mods, the base game still looks decent and plays fine, but if you aren't afraid to tinker in some game files, you can grab the Doom Redux mod for free, drop it into your Doom 3 game folder, and then load the mod from the main menu. If you do it right, your main campaign will play the same, but it can look like this. With or without the Redux mod, there are also flashlight mods that'll let you see with a gun out. And I don't think that's too immersion breaking. After all, I'm on Mars and they've got teleporters. You'd think someone would have figured out how to put a light on a helmet. If I were going to play through the game again, this is how I would do it. Though I would remind you that the original version of the game is a lot more difficult than the remaster, and by that I mean I felt more threatened in the first hour on the lowest difficulty of the original than I did at any point on the medium difficulty of BFG. Alright, Even though I still enjoyed Doom 3 on this replay, I think maybe the takeaway I have is that it's a solid fine out of 10. It's not a bad game, but it is badly balanced in both versions, poorly paced, and filled to the brim with missed opportunities. More than anything else, it's weighed down by the Doom name hanging around its neck. If they had started a new franchise, it could have leaned fully into the survival horror mechanics and put more focus on an interesting story. On the other hand, if they really wanted to stick to a Doom game, they could have designed better levels, better enemy AI, and polished the weapon feel to keep the minute-to-minute gameplay loop more engaging. As it is, the new for the time ideas are constrained under a certain level of early 2000s jank, and they didn't get the level of polish that they needed to really shine. But I do still think Doom 3 is worth playing. It might not stand as tall as its younger or older siblings, but I don't think that it deserves to be remembered as some terrible failure. It's just different, and it's still my favorite Doom. It's available on basically any console if that's your poison of choice. My playthrough was on the PS5 and it crashed at least once an hour. Thankfully, there was always a checkpoint, so I didn't lose a ton of time, but it was really obnoxious. So if you do decide to give it a shot, I strongly recommend the PC version. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Check out my free Patreon if you'd like the occasional work-in-progress update. I think the next video might be an old 3D platformer. As always, thanks for watching. Later. I should have edited this better, but it's so long and it gets so boring having to write the same thing 100 goddamn times.